In today's episode, The Preacher and the Mistress, we will learn how an elderly preacher and his mistress used his Texas-based Christian radio talk show to steal over $30 million from his older listeners. He used his faith-based approach to convince his loyal listeners to invest their lifetime savings in his fraudulent products. In return for their devastating financial scheme, the preacher received more than 3 life sentences, and their mistress received a life sentence for their deceitful acts.
Hello and welcome to Real Life Regulators. This podcast series is brought to you by the North American Securities Administrators Association, also known as NASA. This podcast was created to educate investors using real-life examples of securities fraud cases, also known as investment fraud. During each episode, we review different cases and discuss what went wrong, how you can identify the red flags of securities fraud, and what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones from facing similar situations. I'm your host, John Eichhorn, and I'm the Director of the Compliance Enforcement and Anti-Fraud Division with the Kansas Department of Insurance. My co-host today is Rachel Carden, Director of Investor Education with the Tennessee Securities Division.
Also joining us is attorney Suzanne Steinmetz with the Enforcement Division of the Texas State Securities Board. Welcome, Suzanne. Today we're going to discuss a case out of Texas that involves a man who ran a Ponzi scheme to steal nearly $30 million from almost 200 people, all under the guise of being a charismatic and trustworthy Christian radio host. And Suzanne, you've even described this as one of the worst cases you have seen in your career. But before we dive into the case details, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for the Texas State Securities Board?
Well, I am an enforcement attorney with the Texas State Securities Board, which means that I investigate and at times prosecute securities fraud matters that take place in Texas. And I've been doing this for a little over 24 years.
As we mentioned in our introduction, this case involves a man from the Texas area who ran a Ponzi scheme to defraud nearly 200 people, some of them even losing their life savings. So let's set the stage as far as who he is, when and where this all took place.
Can you briefly describe to our listeners who this man is, including his name and maybe even a little bit about what he looks like?
Yeah, so his name was William Neal Gallagher, and he commonly went by Neal, or even more commonly went by Doc. Most people called him Doc Gallagher. He was born in 1941, so he was, white-haired, elderly senior citizen himself. He attended college back east in Rhode Island, and I'm not sure what his major there for his undergrad was, but eventually he did get a PhD in religion and philosophy from Brown University. That's where the name Doc or doctor came from. He also, once he got into the investment world, the securities world, he liked to go by the name the Money Doctor. He did security. He was involved in the securities industry starting as early as 1985, where he was a registered securities investment agent broker from approximately between 1985 and 2001. And then from 2003 to 2009, he was an investment advisor. Also, I'm not sure when it began, but until approximately 2019, he was also a registered insurance agent.
So, Suzanne, we know this all took place in Texas, but specifically, where did this fraudulent activity take place?
It took place in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, what we call DFW or the Metroplex. He was located in Tarrant County, which the major city for Tarrant County is Fort Worth, but he was located in a town called Hearst, a little suburb of Fort Worth. And he it affected investors probably throughout the entire Metroplex, the entire DFW area.
So what was his reputation in this community? So, how did people come to know him as someone they would want to do financial business with?
So Doc Gallagher was a self-proclaimed Christian, and he really emphasized that and he met people through church. He also hosted at least 3 radio programs that he paid for. I mean, they were essentially ads, but they were radio programs he hosted on 3 different DFW area radio stations. And in particular, he was on a Christian talk radio station that was very popular and doing his, and then he would also host senior seminars and activities. He would have events where he would have people come in and perform and dance and sing. And he just was very active in both the Christian community and the senior.
So during the time that you think that the scheme was starting to take shape, what do you think Gallagher was doing work-wise?
So, as I said before, he was, when it started to take shape, so he stopped being the investment having any securities type license, whether it was a broker or an investment advisor in 2009. And after that, he was solely an insurance agent. And he had 2 companies he was running. One was called the Gallagher Agency, and one was the Gallagher Financial Group. And he was offering his insurance services and investment, retirement advice. He had been on our radar for a while. In 1999, the Texas Securities Board issued an order, reprimanding him for fraudulent investment practices and falsely claiming to be a registered investment advisor, because that was before he got his investment advisor registration. But basically, when the scheme started, he just, to everyone's knowledge, he was primarily doing insurance sales products.
So you mentioned, folks might have thought he was a registered firm, but was Gallagher or his firm registered in any capacity?
Only as an insurance entity, but no, they were not registered to sell any kind of investments.
So, Suzanne, what did he offer to investors?
So he mainly offered something called the Diversified Growth and Income Strategy account, which is a product he claimed to have invented. And and then other people at his agencies offer at the agency, because he wasn't just him. He owned the agency, but he did have other insurance agents that worked underneath him, and they offered annuities, and were, as far as we know, following the proper law and doing what they were supposed to do. But he wasn't. What people would come in thinking maybe he was going to offer them annuities, and instead he offered him this Diversified Growth and Income Strategy account.
What type of people invested with Mr. Gallagher? Did he target a specific demographic?
Yeah, so his target was 100% senior citizens, people getting either retired or getting ready to retire. We found that his victims ranged from the age of about 60 to 91. So everything was targeted to seniors and to retirement.
So what was he promising to these seniors as investors?
So he was promising that this Diversified Growth and Income Strategy account, which we also call sometimes for shorthand called the DGI account, was kind of a retirement savings account, investment account that they would never outlive. He promised that they would get returns between 5 and 8%. And he would do that through the account, had 5 classes in it, or 5 investments, and the investor's money would be evenly distributed, 20% in each. It consisted of treasuries, something he called the Investor Business Daily Formula, which the investors understood to be publicly traded stocks. He also, 20% would be put in fixed indexed annuities, another 20% would be put in life settlements, and the final 20% would be put in something he called value dividends, which investors understood to be mutual funds. He promised them, too, that the principal would never decrease, and so that they would be able to either roll over their 5 to 8% returns, or they could take that 5 to 8% return out and still have the principal they put in.
So it sounds like he made a lot of promises to investors, but did he ever discuss any potential risks with them?
No, quite the opposite. He basically said there was no risk. Not only did he say that their principal would never go down, that they wouldn't outlive their money. He, talked about previously in around 2008, there was an investment downturn, and he would say that while other Wall Street investors, everyone lost money, his clients didn't lose anything. He additionally would tell them that all of their returns were tax-free. So they were investors were under the impression that there was absolutely no risk to their investment.
With nearly 200 investors, I have to believe that people trusted this guy. Suzanne, how did he convince people to give him money?
Yeah, they trusted him completely. One, he used his Christian belief system and their Christian belief system, many of them, as to prove that he was a great guy. I mean, he even wrote a book that was called Jesus Christ, Money Master: The Wisest Words Ever Spoken on Money. He would pray with investors. He would send them notes and gift cards in the mail if any of them were having any issues. He would be there, help them. They all considered him to be not only a great Christian, but a wonderful friend. If some investors would come to him in the beginning when they first were meeting with him, and they might have had credit card debt, and he would pay off their credit card debt. Or they might have like a large mortgage that was causing them issues, and he would help pay off their mortgage. He just was always, people just considered him a friend, and he would go out of his way to emphasize that he was their friend. He talked about how you shouldn't invest with anyone if they wouldn't care about you if they didn't have your money. So he got people to believe that he was their friend first and their investment advisor second.
So did he ever make good on any of those investments that came to him?
No, I think through our investigation, along with the investigation of a couple other agencies, including the SEC and the Department of Insurance, we saw no money going towards anything. I believe we saw one annuity being purchased out of between 150 and 200 investors. All the rest of the money just was either used to pay other investors, to pay himself, various things. But no, he never purchased any of the five asset classes that he promised.
How much were people investing, and where did this money come from?
Most people were investing their entire retirement savings. He would encourage them to roll over 401ks, IRAs. If they had other types of investments, he would encourage them to put them all with him, because he claimed that he was the only person who could keep that money protected and safe. So unfortunately, many people put their entire retirement savings with him, whether it be 100,000, 750,000, a million, whatever they had was all, for many people, was all going to him.
So along the way, perhaps some investors may have asked him at some point how he made this money, his money on these investments. What would he tell those investors in those instances when asked?
Yeah, he would give a couple of different scenarios for people that asked how he was making his money. One is he claimed that he had bought some gold and silver reserves, and that was protecting their money. Another, he told some investors that he had bought, like, I believe it was $20 million in treasury bonds, and that was supporting them. And then other people were told that, that they were promised between 5 and 8%, but he was actually making more like 9 or 10%. And so he would keep the difference between what their interest rate was, or the return rate, and what he was making.
So it sounds like that this scheme went on for quite some time. Can you give us kind of a snapshot of what that timeline looks like from when maybe it had started until it was brought to your attention?
We're not exactly sure when it started, but we started really truly looking into it and moving on it in very early 2019, and we believe it was going on for at least a decade prior to that. So at least as early as 2009, maybe earlier, but we really focused on the 2009 to 2019 timeframe.
So let's talk about how this activity first came to your office's attention, and then that investigation that subsequently followed. What did that look like?
Yeah, like I said earlier, he had kind of been on our radar for a while. We had that 1999 order against him, or concerning him. But what really happened was because he was an insurance agent, the Texas Department of Insurance started looking into him for things that could come up on their radar. And so when they started looking into him and looking at his financials, they realized that he wasn't actually selling insurance products. Um, that he was, doing something else. Just from looking at the bank records, it was hard to tell exactly what he was doing, but it wasn't purchasing annuities or other insurance products. And once they realized that it looked like it involved an investment or a security, they came to us and to the Dallas County DA's office and asked us to help investigate this with them.
So tell us a little bit more about when exactly and how your office first learned of this activity.
Yeah, so it was early 2019. And like I said, it was when we got a call from the DA's office and the Texas Department of Insurance. And we had a meeting here at our office in the Dallas, office of the Texas Securities Board. And just talk. Luckily, the insurance department had already gotten the bank records, so they gave us the bank records so that we could analyze them and figure it out. And then also started trying to talk to investors. One of the difficulties we had was because he was so beloved, Doc Gallagher was so beloved. Most investors didn't want to talk to us and didn't want to talk to the Department of Insurance. Um, so we had a hard time figuring out what he was offering to people. But luckily, or unfortunately for the few people, some investors started to have some questions and were willing to talk and explain to us what they were investing in. And that's when we were able to learn about this DGI account and how it wasn't an insurance product and was actually an investment, a security that would be regulated by us.
So like most securities fraud investigations, you find that the use of funds isn't exactly what the investors were told they were going to be used for. So when you started digging into your evidence surrounding Gallagher's operation, what did you discover in the use of funds?
So we discovered he was using it for, for his personal life. I wouldn't say it was necessarily a lavish initially, but he was using it for his personal. He was using it to run his company, and he was using it to make Ponzi payments to investors so that they wouldn't have any questions. Additionally, he was funneling his money through his longtime mistress, a woman named Deborah May Carter, Debbie Carter, and he would funnel quite a bit to her that she was then hiding for them to use in the future, so that they could retire. And she put it into gold and silver and property, bought a 900-acre ranch and some other properties, and then also funneled it through another company that she had set up with her daughter, although her daughter didn't know what was going on. But unfortunately for her daughter's name was on the account. But that's generally what he used his funds for.
Was there ever a moment during this investigation when you realized just how big this case was becoming?
Yes. I mean, one, from the bank records, we could just see just millions of dollars coming in. But then additionally, once it kind of all blew up and it became public, the investigation, his indictment, the SEC put a receivership in place to take over the company. It got on the news, and investors were told that if they had questions or concerns to contact me. And over the next week or two after it became public, I just, tens of people were calling me constantly. I think I would be talking on the phone with one investor, and by the time I got off, I'd have 2, 3, 4, 5 voicemails from more that were calling while I was on the phone. And so just realized how large it was.
So we think there are about 200 victims involved in Gallagher's scheme. How many specifically, Suzanne, were there? And can you tell us a little bit about those victims? How were they impacted?
Yeah, so we don't have a specific number, but we believe there's anywhere between 150 and 200 victims. And like I said before, they were all elderly, ranged between the ages of 60 and 91. Most of them were people that it was normally couples, but some individuals, but people that had worked their entire lives to earn this money. Many of them were educated with college degrees. Some weren't, but all of them were just hardworking Texans who had put together saved all this money for retirement and were, planning to use this for their retirement years. Or some of them were also planning to use this money to leave to their children or to fund their grandchildren's education. Um, and so they were impacted by the fact that many of them lost their entire retirement savings or a humongous portion of it. Um, it was because he promised that their principal was always secure. These people were living their lives like that they had this money not only in the bank, but had this continuous income coming in. So if they invested $500,000, they were living their lives as if that $500,000 was secure and never going to go anywhere. And then when this all imploded, not only did they not have this money coming in that they had been having come in before this profit, but their $500,000 was also gone. And so it devastated many, many people who had to either maybe go back to work after or have to live off just solely off Social Security or just reconfigure their retirement plans or their dreams of helping their grandchildren go to college.
So, as a result of this scheme, do we have an idea of exactly how much money was lost?
We believe it was around $30 million.
Yeah, 30 million. Wow, that's a lot of money. How was he able to conceal this activity for so long? It sounds like it was unknown to so many for so long.
Yeah, most people just had no idea what was going on. And part of it was because he was so beloved by the investors that they wouldn't, when we did kind of at different times over the years, try to reach out to figure out what was going on. No one would talk to regulators, which made it very difficult. Also, when he would have questions, when people would kind of start to have questions about like this doesn't make sense, he would in a way bribe them. He would give them gift cards or, give them little gifts to try to just keep them happy. And so people just didn't ask the kind of questions that they probably should have once they realized things didn't make sense. Additionally, he had his mistress that was helping him hide some of the money. And then he was just making those Ponzi payments. So when people did want some money back, as long as they weren't asking for their entire investment back, and if they were just asking for a little bit extra or just needed like a one-time payment, he would just take other investor funds and give them that money. So they just didn't have any clue that anything was going on.
You had mentioned to us before that this case was kind of a two-piece or two-indictment approach. One of the indictments coming out of Dallas and then the other out of Tarrant County. Can you touch on this process briefly, Suzanne?
Yeah, so when Texas Department of Insurance approached us to help them figure out the securities investment angle, we were working also with Dallas County. At the time, Dallas County had an ADA that had previously worked for our agency and was very knowledgeable about securities fraud. Additionally, because at the time we had very few investors talking to us, and it was really important to stop him from taking any more investors. I believe he was indicted in I think had that meeting maybe late January, early February. I know it was before President's Day of 2019, and but during that time period between January 1st and when the indictments went out, he was able to raise, I think it was around 500,000. So he was continuously raising money, and our goal was to stop him. So uh, we were only talking to, I think it was 20 investors at that time. And so it was important to get an indictment out that we could be public and tell the public about. And so working with Dallas County, we just indicted on securities fraud and money laundering for those 20 investors so that we could get him arrested, and get him stopped. Additionally, we worked with the SEC to that they could file a complaint and get a receiver in place to take over the company and to hopefully salvage if there was any money. I believe when the receiver was put in place, there was only $600,000 in his bank account of the $30 million he took in. But so after we did that indictment with Dallas County, the goal was to, find out who the other investors were, get them to tell us and cooperate, and then, go back and indict again. But because he was located in Tarrant County, where his office actually was, even though the investors were in all the counties of the Metroplex, Tarrant County was very interested in going after him themselves. And so it was decided that they would continue on with and they would indict him with the rest of the victims. And so that's why we had the two-parter. Dallas County ended up doing a plea deal with him where he got pled guilty for 25 years and I believe it was 19 million restitution. And then Tarrant County indicted him after the plea deal and went forward with that.
Before we keep going into the actual case, can you tell us if there was any sort of indication of what Mr. Gallagher's end game was, or perhaps what his original motivation was for doing this scam?
We don't. He didn't really ever speak. He never really communicated or talked other than to plead guilty in both Dallas County and Tarrant County. But my instinct is just he liked to be the big man, to be the person people turn to. I think he called himself, that he, from 85 until 2000, when he was working for other registered brokers, he would refer to himself as a reformed Wall Street insider. And so I think he just liked that he was someone people turned to and could trust, and that he just fed off that. But no, I don't know why he did what he did. His end game, was to run off, we believe, with his mistress and retire somewhere with her. I don't know the time frame. He was already in his late 70s when he was arrested. But his end game, I believe, was to live out the rest of his life on a ranch somewhere with his mistress.
Well, as a reformed, quote unquote, Wall Street person, was he shocked that he ended up being investigated?
I don't know. He was, as I said, he never really spoke. He was, other than to plead guilty, he was very stoic. He just never apologized, never said anything. He never showed any remorse. He was just pretty stoic, and it's confusing, but yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that.
Wow, that's really kind of shocking when somebody doesn't have any remorse for something, especially as big as what he was involved in. With any securities investigation, there's hurdles. I think in any investigation period, there's going to be hurdles. In yours, in this white-collar crime that you investigated, what hurdles did you see?
Yeah, mainly was the fact that he was so beloved by his clients that no one wanted to talk to us, that whenever we did reach out and try to figure out what was going on. And additionally, that he did have an insurance license. So even though he was on the radio and we were aware he was on the radio, if he was selling annuities and insurance products, it didn't fall into our regulation. And we had no reason, without talking to investors, to believe that he was doing anything but selling insurance products and annuities as a retirement vehicle versus, an actual security. So, that made it difficult to stop him, because we just didn't have the power to stop him without the knowledge, without someone talking to us and explaining what he was actually doing. Because until it all collapsed, we had no idea he was selling this diversified, this DGI account. We just believed it was annuities.
So because of the perceived likability and loyalty that these victims had, did they eventually cooperate to help the case?
Yeah, so once it became public and it was on the news and the receiver came in, then they all, had to deal with the unfortunate reality that he was scamming them and that he wasn't a good person and that that they were victims of a crime committed by him. And I talked to just so many of them, and the first things they would say were, "But he was a Christian," or that he was my friend, or I trusted him completely. And it was so not only these people lost their retirement savings, they kind of lost in a minute, in some ways, their innocence, because they just, you know, he was their friend, and he would take them out to lunch and send them nice notes, and if like I said, if someone in their family died, he would be sending them flowers. He was so much more than an investment advisor, a retirement advisor to them. He was their friend, and in some ways maybe kind of a pastor, um, to them because of the whole Christian praying with them. They just really just trusted him completely, utterly, 100% completely.
So, Suzanne, you mentioned that the money that was handed over to Gallagher was sometimes, in some instances, turned into assets. Was any of the money that was found or the property that existed, was it returned to the victims? You mentioned the receivership. Can you explain all of that to us?
Yeah, so the SEC got a receiver put in place, a man named Court Thomas, and he has been able, it's still ongoing, even though it's been in place since 2019. And they've been working diligently to get as much money back for investors as possible. And he was able, like I said, I believe there was only around $600,000 in his bank accounts when he was arrested. But they've been able to, yes, sell the properties that they clawed back from his mistress. They were able, some investors did make more than their principal, did get a return. So he did claw back some of that extra money that they received. They sued the radio stations that his radio program was on. They sued some of the banks. So they were able to get some money back. I mean, it was really pennies on the dollar. I believe ultimately the court approved $23 million in claims. And they've so far been able to distribute 6.6 million back to investors. But as we said, there was like 150 to 200 investors. So that's not a whole lot of money, but it's more than I've seen in a lot of cases. So I guess that's good. But that was mainly through through suing other entities that they felt was complicit.
Hey, Suzanne, so I got to follow up on that. One of the things that I've learned through these investigations, this word clawback that you mentioned. I don't know if you could just give the listeners just a little bit more on that, in a Ponzi scheme, the first investors were actually getting returns, and returns, by who we say that, it's just the money that was being given to them by Gallagher from other investors, right? With their money. So in the end, the clawback is money that's being taken back from those early investors. Do you mind mentioning that just a little bit?
Yeah. So also, not every investor took a return. Some rolled it over, but some of the investors that did take returns, especially if they were, I guess you want to say, lucky enough to get in early, they would, not just they would make back if they invested 100,000, they would make back their 100,000, but then continue to make more after that. And so, in order to make sure it was fair to all the investor class, um, sometimes you have to go back to those investors that made more than their initial investment and ask them to return that money. They don't always have it, so sometimes you settle and they just return a portion of it. But it's so that not to let earlier investors um, benefit where later investors, unfortunately, who got in later, don't get to benefit. As you said, that the payments that these early investors did receive over their initial principal back wasn't profit. It wasn't a return. It was other investors' money. So you're trying to get back people's money that was wrongly, illegally given to these earlier investors to no fault of their own. They're also victims, but we just want to make it fair the goal is to try to make it fair for everybody.
What did the proceedings of the case look like?
So there was no trial on any. So there ended up being the two indictments, Dallas County, which was money laundering and securities fraud, which he pled guilty and did a 25-year deal for that. And then pleading guilty in Tarrant County, but went to the judge for sentencing, and he ended up getting from the judge 3 life sentences plus 30 years. One of the things about all of these cases, since they did involve the elderly, there are enhancements for when you target the elderly, and so that caused him to get why the long sentences in Tarrant County. And my understanding is numerous number of victims came and testified against him, which, encouraged the judge and asked for him to get life sentences. So, like I said, 3 life sentences plus 30 years in Tarrant County, and then 25 years in an order of restitution in Dallas County. And then
Wow.
His mistress was also, Tarrant County also went after his mistress, and she was also indicted, and she went to trial, represented herself, and was found guilty by a jury, and she too was given a life sentence for her role in the scheme.
Wow, that's awesome. You guys did a great job of investigating this, and the prosecution came out favorably for all of those victims. It's great to hear that. Where's Gallagher now?
He is in a prison here in Texas. He has come up for parole, I believe, twice, but has been denied both times. So he's approximately, I think he's 84, if I can do my math correctly, and he'll be 85 next month if I remember his birth date. So I do know he asked for parole based on some medical basis, but as I said, he's been denied. So the hope is that he won't spend the rest of his life in prison paying for what he did to these people.
That's incredible. We've mentioned before that it's really difficult to get a conviction that strong. So I will echo what John said. Fabulous job to the entire Texas team. That's really great for those victims. And we touched on different types of, fraud. We've mentioned Ponzi scheme. And there is elements of affinity fraud, but what type of fraud would you classify this as?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's 100% classic Ponzi scheme and an affinity fraud through the Christian, targeting Christians. But he was also, an imposter. These people thought he was they thought he was an investment advisor. They thought he had all the proper registrations, and that he was someone they could trust. And he, as I said before, he did not have the proper registrations. He was not an investment advisor or a securities broker. He was an insurance agent and only had the power to sell insurance products. Legally should only have been selling insurance products.
So how did the community act for the conviction with these strong penalties?
I mean, obviously the investors were very disappointed that all they were able to get were convictions and jail time. They wanted their money back. But I think everyone was very happy that if they weren't going to get their money back, that he got such long sentences and was going to pay for the crimes that he committed against those people. And then just probably also just in shock. It was a lot of shock. It was a pretty big news story down here. It's even made national news and international news. I think the BBC maybe did a small story on it once. It was a pretty shocking turn of events, especially for someone who was on the radio and had written books, self-published books, but books. And a lot of people, even if they didn't invest with him, were aware of who he was from the radio. And it was pretty big news down here.
So, Suzanne, you did mention to us when we were doing our initial discussions of this case, you mentioned that this was one of the worst cases that you have ever seen. Can you talk about why?
Yeah, I think it's because of who he targeted, targeting senior citizens and convincing them to give him their entire retirement savings. These are people that don't have the opportunity to go back and earn more money. No one deserves to ever be a victim of investment fraud, no matter what age you are. But if you are a victim of it when you're younger, you at least have some ability to maybe make some of this back up. But these were people that, as I said, the youngest, I believe, was 61, and the oldest was 91. These are people that don't really have the opportunity to make back their entire life savings. And also, I think I touched on it earlier, so not to repeat myself, but the fact that they thought their principal was completely secure. So although they were living their life like they had $500,000 in the bank or whatever their investment was, and even though they were getting returns, some of them, they were living their entire life thinking that their investment, their retirement was secure. And it was just devastating to talk to these people, and just so many of them saying they didn't know how they were going to move forward, what they were going to do next, because they didn't know how they were going to be able to live out their remaining retirement with this money being gone.
Suzanne, Texas put so much into this case, the prosecution, the investigation, of course. Why do you think it's so important to discuss this today?
Well, I mean, people just need to be aware that you that no matter how much the person says they're your friend or uses religion or touts things, that you need to still ask questions. I victim hindsight. I always tell people when they call me and they're like, they'll be like, I can't believe I'm so stupid, and I'm like, hindsight's 2020. Anyone can fall for one of these schemes. And so I'm not saying that these people, hindsight is 2020. You don't really understand when you're living in it, like see all the red flags. But when you do have questions, you need to ask them. And just because someone touts that you have a same religion, or that they're an insider with knowledge that other people don't have, you need to ask questions about that. Um, and people need to know that so that they can ask their own questions of their own investment advisors. Um, so they don't, hopefully no one else will fall for a case like this.
So, to avoid falling for cases like this, what are those red flags and warning signs that people should be aware of?
One, always call your state regulator and make sure they're registered. Even if they're your friend and you really like them, at least, just follow up and make sure. If they had called our agency, they would have learned that he wasn't registered as a security broker agent or an investment advisor. And maybe that wouldn't have stopped it originally, but if they explained what they were investing in, that, we could have told them that was something that was required, that they needed to be registered. And, the other red flags was the statements these investors got were very simplistic. They literally would just say the name of the account at the top and the amount they've invested, and then the 20%. So just divided 5 ways, and just say those words I said earlier. Just say, 20% the amount treasuries, 20% the amount life settlements, 20, and they were very simplistic. So investors really had, other than these general categories, just had no specific information about their investment. And so people need just to know you should receive specific information. You should ask for that information and you should get it. And if you don't get it, maybe this isn't the person you want to invest your money with. Everything should be laid out for you, and you should have complete knowledge of where your money is, because it's your money. It's not his money and it's not your investment advisor's money. It's your money. And so these are just things you should look for. If they're not being specific about where your money is, ask questions.
Yeah, good advice, Suzanne. So, the three of us work for securities regulators, and we know that sometimes people can be a little leery about government regulation. So, protecting those who don't want to be protected can be tough. You kind of mentioned a little bit about that even when the interviews of the victims started in your case, Suzanne. Sometimes people don't want to talk. Can you explain why securities regulation is so important?
I mean, it's important because to stop things just like what happened to these people, not one of the things we always tout at the securities board, and I'm sure all securities regulators, is that we're trying to make a level and fair playing field for all investors. We're not here to discourage investments. We're here to encourage investments. We just want them to be fair and we want them to be fraud free. And so we're not trying to stop people from investing. We're not trying to keep people from secret investments that are only there for the uber wealthy. We want. I know specifically in Texas, we tout that we want a very strong economic growth in our state, and we want investors to make what they to be successful. And so securities regulation is there not to stop people from investing, but to help them be successful at investing and not become victims of fraud.
So, what tips or advice would you give to someone if they want to conduct their own research before investing or before working with someone?
Well, the first one would always be Google. Always, I mean, it seems so simplistic, but no, so many times people have called me about, someone, and just a quick Google search will put up maybe some red flags. And I don't remember in this case if that would have done it, but it would have, but call your state regulator, ask them if they're registered. FINRA has its own website, and that you can go on there and find out if someone is a registered securities broker, dealer, agent. And then it'll also can lead you to the SEC's website to let you know if someone's a registered investment advisor. That to me, that's the number one. Make sure they're registered. And if they're not, ask why they're not registered. Obviously, there are times there's exemptions. But just calling, sometimes you can just save a lot of grief by calling your state regulator and just finding out if they're registered. So, if something seems off, it's okay to question things. It's okay. These people they may be investment professionals, but they're not necessarily, they can still be questioned. You can still question them. If things seem off, if things seem weird, don't feel bad for questioning that. Ask the questions, get as much information as you can. And if you don't like their answers, either don't invest or call your regulator and ask them about those answers. I mean, we can't give advice about specific investments or specific people in general, but we can tell you if they're about their registration status, or if something would be considered an investment, if something would be considered a security that is regulated by us. So we can, help with those kind of questions.
So, for our listeners, FINRA is located at finra.org, FINRA.org, and that website can give you that free broker check that you mentioned, and also a lot of states have that listed on their site as well. But just a reminder to our listeners, that's finra.org. We also mentioned the SEC, that's sec.gov. GOV. And so there's information about fraud, and you can look for filings that have been registered with that site. So those are two really great resources. And Suzanne, thank you for mentioning those.
Suzanne, is there anything else that maybe we didn't talk about that we left out that you feel like is important for the listeners?
I thought of something just a second ago. You asked me earlier what like how he spent his money. And one of the things that actually kind of made him genius at getting people to trust him is that he wasn't flashy. He wasn't out there driving a Ferrari or a Porsche or living in some huge house. So just because someone seems like you and is not living this grand life doesn't mean that they can't also be scamming you. So just something to think about too. But yeah, our agency, we can help anyone, or answer questions from anyone, not just people that live in Texas, but if you're looking to invest with someone that's an entity that's located in Texas and you're in a different state, you can always contact our agency. We also have a website, ssb.texas.gov, with all of our contact information and who you can call. But, it probably only takes a 10-15 minute phone conversation with your securities regulator to ask a couple questions to, hope maybe keep you from losing your retirement savings.
Very good points. And, Rachel, you mentioned FINRA and SEC, and Suzanne, you're talking about going straight to the regulator themselves. For those of us that are listening, remember that you can go to nasa.org. So that's NASAA.org. You click on Contact Your Regulator tab located at the top left corner. When you click on this, you're going to be able to see your jurisdiction on a map. Of course, we're all from different places across the country, North America, Canada, Mexico. So contacting your particular person will be easy in finding that contact information through that map or that interactive map. Being an informed investor means having a plan and understanding each of your investments. Whether you're new to investing or already investing, NASA and its members provide a variety of online investor education resources for investors of all ages. Visit nasa.org for more information on how you can be a wise and safe investor. Again, that's NASAA.org. So, Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us today. This story to me and to Rachel and to the listeners is going to be very interesting, and I think going to be very helpful to us as investors to keep ourselves safe. Thank you for everything that you do each and every day to protect investors. And that's it for us today. From Topeka, Kansas, I'm John Eichhorn.
And from Nashville, Tennessee, I'm Rachel Carden. If you have any questions about today's podcast or would like more information about the topics discussed, please email us at realliferegulators@gmail.com. That's realliferegulators, all one word, @gmail.com. If you would like to hear future episodes, please hit the subscribe button below.
NASA provides its information as a service to investors. It's neither a legal interpretation nor an indication of a policy position by NASA or any of its members. If you have questions concerning the meaning or application of a particular state or provincial law, rule, or regulation, please consult an attorney that specializes in securities law.